Just past the top of the hour here at KPFA. My name is Brian Edwards-Tiekert. Normally I'm live on the air at 7 a.m., but as part of our fundraising efforts, we occasionally bring you one of our favorite interviews from that time slot to this one. Hope you enjoy it. You're listening to Upfront. I'm Brian Edwards-Tiekert. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the program Yanis Varoufakis. He's best known for his brief stint as finance minister of Greece, where he was probably the world's most prominent champion of anti austerity politics. But he's had a long career as an economist and author before and since then. His new book makes the case that massive tech companies have so changed our economic and social system that we need a new name for it. His proposal is the title of the new book, Techno-Feudalism: What Killed Capitalism. Yanis Varoufakis, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Definitions first. What is techno-feudalism?
It is the socioeconomic mode of production that succeeded capitalism, in my estimation. This is a very controversial perspective. I understand that entirely. But you see, my point is, and this is the delicious contradiction of what I'm saying, that's how I would like to think of it, is that capital has become so triumphant. It has become so unopposed in this march towards complete power over labor, over government, over community, over society, over culture, that through this superb, majestic power that it accumulated for itself, it mutated like a very toxic virus into a new strain. A new form of capital has emerged, which I call cloud capital. And cloud capital, like a stupid virus, a very virulent stupid virus, has killed off its host, which is capitalism. And it replaced it with something that combines, science fiction with feudalism. That's what I call techno-feudalism.
You're not arguing capitalism is gone per se, but that it is subordinate to this techno-feudalism.
Look, if you and I were having this discussion, let's say in 1778, just an arbitrary date, around that great transformation of feudalism to capitalism, and I were to say to you that feudalism is now being superseded by a new system called capitalism, you would look at me askance, because wherever we looked, whether we were in England or in France or in the United States at the time, wherever we cast our eye, we would see feudalism. But nevertheless, the feudal system was on its way out, and it was being superseded by the new capitalist system, which, of course, relied entirely for sustenance on a feudal agricultural sector. To this very day, you still have a feudal sector, an agrarian sector, which feeds capitalism with nutrition, with agricultural products, and so on and so forth. So it's, when we shift from one socioeconomic mode of production to another, the new one always has embedded part of the old one. So the old stays, even in our bodies. Biologist friends tell me that we still have elements of serpent DNA in us. So yes, techno-feudalism needs a capitalist sector within it to produce surplus value, but the capitalist sector is no longer running the show. In the same way that after capitalism emerged, the feudal agrarian rentier sector was no longer running the show.
Let's back up a second. You're describing techno-feudalism as the result of a historical process, which prompts the question, when does techno-feudalism start and how?
Well, again, if you ask me the question, when did capitalism start? God knows. It's a bit like asking me, when did you get bald? Which hair did you have to lose before you were declared bald? There's no answer to this question, but I can tell you there was some time around my mid-30s when I thought, my goodness, I'm getting bald. So this range, this gray zone, when, in my estimation, capitalism began its transformation to techno-feudalism, coincided with the beginning of the great financial collapse of 2008, and the time in the around 2015, 2016, when you had a number of developments. First, you had quantitative easing. The Fed, the European Central Bank, the Central Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, and so on, minted more than 35 trillion American dollars to save the bankers, the bailouts, which you are very familiar with. And most of that money was used by people like Zuckerberg to invest in cloud capital. It coincided with the maturation of algorithms, with reinforcement learning, with AI that allowed Alexa this dialectical relationship between us and it, and coincided also with the complete privatization of the internet. The internet initially was a commons, it was a capitalism free zone, a capital free zone. People used the internet for gift exchanges. So you wrote a program, you gave it for free to the community, and in return you got programs that others wrote for you. That's how heroically and beautifully Internet One started. But by the time the Facebooks and the Googles and so on colonized uh, the internet, you had this conversion of the internet into a series of cloud thieves. So those three things go together. The 2008 crisis, the money printed by central banks on behalf of financiers who gave it away to conglomerates, but the only conglomerates that actually invested in capital, that was cloud capital, was big tech, and the development of AI, of reinforcement machine learning.
So, what is an example of a techno-feudalist enterprise? What are the attributes that set it apart?
Why not start with Jeff Bezos' Amazon.com, which I think is a splendid example. Cloud capital, this mutation of capital, has enabled Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com to do remarkable things. Take Alexa, which sits on your desk if you bought one, and presents itself as your slave, as your mechanical servant. You ask it to do things, to book appointments, to order milk, to switch on lights, and so on and so forth. But it's not your slave. It is an interface between you and Jeff Bezos' Cloud Capital. And Cloud Capital is this agglomeration of algorithms, of cell phone towers, of optic fiber cables, of huge server farms, a lot of real machinery working so that Amazon.com functions. And essentially through Alexa or various other interfaces, not just Alexa, it's just an example. What happens is you have this algorithmic capital, which I call cloud capital, which you train, you teach things about yourself so that it trains you to train it better, to give you good advice. And once you have good advice, and I always get good advice from Amazon.com when it recommends a book, I invariably want to read it. And, it's just a matter of how much I enjoy it, not whether I enjoy it or not. Similarly with Spotify. When Spotify recommends music to me, it knows me. It recommends music that I appreciate. And that is an immense power that the algorithm has over me, because the next time it recommends something, I will take it very seriously. So this algorithm capital is dialectically connected with me. I train it to train me, to train it, to train me, to train me, and so on. And then it imputes into my soul, into my head, into my heart, wherever these things are, a need, a desire for something, which then the same piece of algorithmic capital satiates by selling it to me directly, bypassing every market, every shopping mall, every capitalist realm of buying and selling in a decentralized market way. And so when I order, let's say, an electric bicycle from Amazon.com, which Amazon.com has convinced me I need to buy, then firstly, I don't go to a shop to get it. And secondly, there is a proletarian working in an Amazon warehouse being driven, absolutely driven, by the same algorithm that has created my desire for that model, for that electric bicycle, and which has sold it to me. The same algorithm drives that worker. These workers in Amazon warehouses have this device strapped to their wrists, which monitors what they do, where they pick up packages, parcels, how long they spent in the toilet, whether they talk to other fellow workers, and therefore the same piece of cloud capital computes the probability with which a union will be formed in that Amazon warehouse, and therefore fires workers that heighten the probability of unionization. Folks, if I'm right in what I'm saying, this is no longer capitalism, and that's where I say welcome to techno-feudalism.
Mm. Techno-feudalism, because you're describing an entity that can extract rents rather than create profits based on the surplus value of its workers.
Absolutely, spot on. Look, Henry Ford, Westinghouse, all the great industrial lords of the turn of the 20th century that created the most significant stage of capitalism after the second industrial revolution essentially shaped the modern world as we know it. They used their accumulated capital, that is, produced the means of production, in order to produce things. They used the power that that capital gave them to usurp governments, to bully municipalities, to end the tramways and the various competitors to the car, so that they would sell their car, they would sell their electricity. Like think of the currency wars between Edison and Westinghouse and so on. But in the final analysis, they were interested in one thing: in profit that they extracted from selling things that their machinery was producing. Their produced means of production was producing. Jeff Bezos doesn't produce anything. His capital, cloud capital, creates a digital world. I call it a cloud fiefdom because it lives in the cloud and it's like a fiefdom. He owns it. And like a feudal lord of yesteryear, he charges anyone who sells stuff on his realm anything between 10 and 40% of the price that you and I pay. Meanwhile, you and I, when we are on Amazon.com, we, through our free labor, maybe voluntarily, but that doesn't matter, by posting reviews, we add to the cloud capital. Because when you add a review to a book, to a product, you increase the capacity of that piece of cloud capital to gather more users and to enclose within its enclosures more people. And that makes it even more necessary for anyone who wants to sell anything also to be selling on that platform and be paying the equivalent of ground rent, which I call a cloud rent, to the owner of this cloud fiefdom, the cloudalist, as I call Jeff Bezos.
It strikes me that this isn't an entirely new problem. In one way, what you're describing is a network monopoly, where each piece of data that is introduced to Amazon makes the collective value of all the data it has even more higher than the incremental value of the single unit of data. Uh, you could say the same thing about a railroad in the late 20th century. The more nodes there are on the railroad network, the more valuable the network as a whole. Economists call these natural monopolies or network monopolies, chronicle how the entities that control them become rent extractors. Like what is the difference between a classic network monopoly and what you're describing?
I think that there are elements of this, of course. Amazon.com and the cloud thieves, as I call them, are, an extension of the networked monopolies that you are referring to, but they are far, far more. And there is a qualitative difference, not just a quantitative difference. And it is this: a monopoly is still a market. It is a market that has been cornered by one seller who uses the concentration of his market power to create the network effects that you so well described. But it remains a marketplace. So in my book, I tell a fictional story. Imagine you and I are walking together into a kind of monopolized town owned by Jeff Bezos in the digital space. Now, if this was the analog world, you and I would be walking into a far west setting where the same person owns the saloon, the grocery store, the bank, the post office, everything. the houses. But at least you and I would enter, would walk into this Western kind of town or village or township, but we would be able to talk to one another. We would be able, as consumers in a shopping mall, let's say, to comment on what we see in some store, even to agree with one another, maybe with other people, that you know what, we do not want to buy from these people here, we're going to boycott them. But in the digital space, you and I cannot talk to one another. If you enter Amazon.com and I enter Amazon.com on your laptop, your phone, your tablet, and me on mine, any communication between anyone on that tablet or network is mediated through the cloud capital of Jeff Bezos. Nobody talks to anyone. No one can convey any information to anyone or opinion unless it's vetted by the same algorithm that runs Alexa. So this is no longer a marketplace. It's not even a monopolized marketplace. And remember, in the final analysis, the owner of the railroad, or Thomas Edison, who created this magnificent network company that provided everything from the electricity from the power station all the way to the light bulb, in the end, he wanted to sell you what he was producing, the railway service, or the electricity, or the electric oven. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to sell you anything. He just wants to embed you in that fiefdom that he's created, along with producers, actual producers of stuff, capitalists. I call them vassal capitalists because they are not in any sense autonomous agents in that trading platform, which is not a market. I insist these are not markets, because to have a market, you have to have some degree of decentralization. You and I to be able to talk to one another when we're in it. That does not exist in a cloud fief. So in a sense, it's not a market. And that's why I don't call it a monopoly. It is an enclosure within which every pairing is mediated through the algorithm owned by the landlord, by the cloudalist. And I think it's crucial, in my view, to make the mental leap as observers and users and citizens to understand that, that this is qualitatively different from being in a monopolized market town or in a railway analog network. This is a different species of abstraction where nobody can talk to anyone else. There is no degree of decentralization. It's all fully centralized. To put it differently and provocatively, this is Stalinism gone berserk, but without common ownership of the means of production, with complete private ownership of everything. It's like, what the Stalinist Ministry for Planning, Gosplan, would have loved to have done, but they didn't have the algorithms to do it. Jeff Bezos has done it and has turned this into a private fiefdom.
The voice of economist Yanis Varoufakis, most famously served a brief stint as finance minister of Greece during the early months of its left-wing Syriza government and the height of its sovereign debt crisis and clash with Eurozone monetary authorities. We're going to continue the interview with Yanis Varoufakis for the bulk of this hour. I'm jumping in with a very quick fundraising update because it is a big one. One longtime KPFA listener and supporter, Cynthia in Berkeley, has just offered to double $1,000 if we can raise enough to match her. I don't have a lot of time to fundraise right now, so I'll get straight to the point. That is a lot of money for us to raise, particularly at this time of day. If we can hit that $1,000 mark by the end of the hour and turn it into two, we will help KPFA make up some ground, which it badly needs to make up right now. So our fate is going to be in your hands. The best place to donate is kpfa.org. If you need a phone line, we've got everyone coming into the building free right now. 1-800-439-5732. We have two and only two thank you gifts featured this hour. The first is the book that Yanis Varoufakis just published, which is what we've been discussing. It's entitled Techno-Feudalism: What Killed Capitalism. It's yours for a pledge of $10 a month or $100 all at once at kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732. Charts how we're shifting from a system that resells the product of labor at a profit to one that extracts rents from its ownership of a collection of algorithms, data, and commuting resources that mediate the real economy of goods and services. He makes the argument that this changes our politics and society because this algorithmic capital also mediates our conversations with one another. And he traces this out to, everything from day-to-day life to geopolitics. In his accounting, the US-China rivalry is fundamentally driven by rival systems of cloud capital. He also is solutions-oriented and devotes a bunch of his book to what an escape might look like, busting open fiefdoms by requiring interoperability, compensating the labor of us serfs who surf the internet by redistributing those rents as a basic income, socializing ownership of the companies that have become fundamental to the operation of our society and economy. The book is yours for a donation of $10 a month. If we could get 10 people to do that, we would bring in that $1,000 challenge. We also have a brand new documentary series about Yanis Varoufakis and his work. It is 6 documentaries total. Most of it focuses on his tenure as finance minister of Greece, and it is a roller coaster. The documentary series is called In the Eye of the Storm, and that is a donation of $15 a month. Were you to pledge for both the book and the film series, the combined pledge rate would be $25 a month or $250 all at once, and that would get us 1/4 of the way towards making our challenge. All right, I have already spoken for too long, so I'm going to take a leap of faith, put our fate in your hands. Hope you donate something as we go back to the conversation with Yanis Varoufakis. If we can extend your comparison, in this hypothetical company store in the late 19th century, I can talk to other customers, but I can't nail a critique of the products and pricing to the wall of the store. At Amazon, I can't talk to the other people that are on the same page in an unmediated fashion, but I can go attack Amazon on Twitter or write a letter to the New York Times. I have other outlets with which to communicate laterally. How different is that?
Well, to begin with, in the western town of my allegory, the fact that we can talk to one another means that there is still a polis, in the sense of the dialectic that the ancient Athenian philosophers refer to as the essence, the foundation of a political realm. We can communicate through it, we can see, we can look into each other's eyes, recognize ourselves from the reflection that we catch of ourselves in the eyes of the other. We can have this discussion. We can try to pin our manifesto on a door, even if we are shot down by the deputy, right? But politics is possible. In Amazon.com, politics is not possible. Now I come to your point, very poignant point, that yes, I can go to Twitter. But what is Twitter? Twitter is another cloud fiefdom belonging to some other cloudalist, techno-feudal lord, Elon Musk in this case. And again, in that realm, again, I am the subject of an algorithm, and I can only communicate to others what the other techno-feudal lord's algorithm permits me to. Even in the Middle Ages, in feudal Europe, there was mobility between different fiefdoms. There was rivalry between fiefdoms. There was one fiefdom that would shrink and be shriveled to bits, and another fiefdom that would take over. And they were techno-feudal lords. Some of them were on the rise. Some of them were shrinking in terms of their power. There was rivalry, and there was a possibility of mobility. That's what we have. I'm not saying that you are stuck in Amazon.com and you can never get out. Groundhog Day. But the idea of capitalism as a marketplace that doesn't belong to anyone, which is a decentralized space where there is competition and maybe monopolistic competition, with profit being the main driver of the system and capital accumulating as a result of the employment of waged labor. That's gone. Most of the capital of Facebook, of Twitter, is provided by unwaged labor, by you and me, going in there and doing things, tweeting, uploading videos on TikTok. It doesn't matter whether it's voluntary or not. It is free labor. So up until 10 years ago, there was no capital good, whether it was a railway road or electricity generation or a tractor that was not produced by waged labor. Now, most of the new, all dancing, all singing cloud capital is produced by cloud serfs. People like our listeners who are volunteering to do work that is unwaged. And that I'm not making this as an ethical point. I'm speaking as an economist. This is the stuff of nightmares. Because when all this capital is produced by unwaged labor, you can imagine the effect that has on aggregate demand, on the capacity of society to generate enough demand for investment into the things that society needs. It really collapses. And just to highlight the point, all the monopolistic capitalists that you mentioned in our conversation so far, take General Electric, General Motors, Ford Motor Company, British Aerospace, BASF, more or less, and this is quite uniform. Out of every $100 that they made in revenues, 80 to 85, that's a minimum, went to wages and salaries. If you look at Facebook, less than 1% of its revenues go to wages and salaries, including the high salaries of the directors. I'm not including Zuckerberg here and his accumulating capital in the stock exchange. Now, you only need to state that to realize the negative impact that has, the monumental impact it has on the capacity of this extractive system to reproduce itself through a market-based series of activities. It's short. It can't do it. And this is why, in my view, it's important to understand that we are not in what we always consider to be capitalism, a realm of markets and profit, but we're in somewhere else where we have cloud thieves and rent, cloud rent, which is increasingly taking over a very large percentage of GDP, and therefore destabilizing the already unstable capitalism that we had.
It sounds like you're describing three distinct related phenomena that I want to name separately to make sure I've got it right. So the first is the first thing you laid out, which is a system in which platform companies make themselves universal intermediaries in economic life and are able to extract value from the real economy, move it upward to people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. The second, discussed in our allegory about the company store, is that they've imposed themselves as intermediaries in our social life, which changes the possibility of collective political action. And the third, which you've just described, is a change in the mode of production in which a large number of people are basically working for free by being active on the internet and training the algorithms that run it, thereby increasing the capital value of the large platform companies that operate those algorithms. How am I doing?
Brilliantly. You're absolutely right. But each one of these three realms that you described is a rabbit hole, a separate rabbit hole, and you can really fall a long way down each one of them. So, for instance, the second dimension that you mentioned, the second realm, which is very important, the effect it has on political life, is not only that it has stopped us from talking to one another, but it has ensured that our conversations are poisoned because the algorithm that regulates our conversation, whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or what TikTok, whatever, these algorithms are primed to make us angry. Because if we are angry with one another, then we spend more time producing cloud capital for these platforms. To give an example of the third one, you mentioned your third realm is the transformation of the socioeconomic mode of production to something I call techno-feudalism. You can look at another dimension of that, which is geostrategic. If my hypothesis holds water, if it's even to some extent correct, then who owns cloud capital matters. Where cloud capital is concentrated plays a substantial role in forging geopolitics. Now, Europe doesn't have any cloud capital. Asia has very little except China. Japan doesn't. Japan produces cars, electronics, and so on, but doesn't own cloud capital. The only two loci, places where cloud capital is concentrated, are the United States of America and China. And to me, that if you fall down that rabbit hole, you start realizing why there is this increasing tension between the United States and China, why it was Donald Trump who started it and Joe Biden who turbocharged it, this new Cold War between the United States and China. Because personally, I don't buy it that it's got anything to do with Taiwan or China becoming more uppity when it comes to military matters and its capacity to project its power in the South China Seas. That was always the case. It was the case 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So my question has always been, why are we seeing this escalating new Cold War between the United States and China, and the one that starts from the United States, from the White House, from the American administration? Each one of these three realms, as I said, has many dimensions that can be explored.
You're saying what we're seeing is our governments act out the rivalry between Amazon and Alibaba, between Facebook and TikTok.
No, I think that's too conspiratorial and not as spot on as it should be. Look, in a previous book of mine, many, many years ago, which I call The Global Minotaur, I came up with a hypothesis that the foundation, the main reason, the main cause, the foundation of American hegemony worldwide was the capacity through the exorbitant privilege of the dollar to recycle other people's capitalist profits, other people's surpluses. From the late 1960s onwards, the United States has been going more and more into the red. The trade surplus of the early 1960s became a trade deficit, and it is expanding. Day in, day out, the American trade deficit is expanding. And this is not the only country for which it happens, but it is the only country in the history of the universe whose hegemonic power increases in proportion to its trade deficit. Other empires in the past, when they went into the red, they collapsed. The United States goes from strength to strength in proportion to its trade deficit. Now, how does this connect to techno-feudalism? Let me put it this way. Smart people in Washington, D.C. have always recognized, independently of whether they were in the Democratic administration or the Republican administration, that this is the strength of the United States, that it manages to expand its trade deficits. These trade deficits of the United States of America operate like a huge vacuum cleaner, which suck into the United States the exports of the German industrialists, the French industrialists, or winemakers or champagne makers, of the Japanese industrialists, and ultimately of the Chinese industrialists. And how does America pay for that? With IOUs called US dollars, which are being minted in massive quantities, which then the Chinese, Japanese, German, and French capitalists return to Wall Street to invest in American public debt, in American equities, shares, and of course in American real estate in Miami, in California, in New York, and so on. This recycling mechanism, which I call the Minotaur for reasons that we shouldn't get into now, is predicated on the monopoly of the payment system being American and being founded on the US dollar. Now, with digital payments, this monopoly is under threat. The Chinese not only have a competitor to Google, a competitor to Facebook, a competitor to Netflix, a competitor to Twitter. They have all these. The Europeans don't have that. The Indians don't have it. The Africans do not have it. The Chinese have it. But they have something that the United States does not have. In the United States, in your country, there is a clash between Wall Street and Silicon Valley. That is, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan will never allow Apple or Google to take over the financial system that they completely monopolize. They will allow Apple Pay to use the payment system of Wall Street, but as a partner. Most of the financial rents will go to JP Morgan, they will go to Visa, to MasterCard, to Wall Street. Now, China does not have this clash because under the auspices, let's call it that, or tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party, big tech in China and the financial sector are enmeshed. They are one thing. So you have a company like Tencent providing to anyone, including you, the opportunity of downloading an app called WeChat, which does everything. It's an everything app. It does everything that Netflix does, Airbnb, Uber, Twitter, and so on. But it does something that none of the American cloud-based big tech companies can do. It allows you to make free money transfers to anyone with a Chinese account, a Chinese currency account, the one. Now that Wall Street will never allow to happen. Which means that in China today, there is a digital payment system, which is international because all digital systems are international, if you want to deal in one, and which now is being connected to the Chinese central bank digital currency, the equivalent of a digital dollar, which they have. They have the digital yuan or renminbi. Now, this is like a superhighway for money that is infinitely superior to anything the United States can provide, not because of technological backwardness by the United States, but because Wall Street will never allow it to exist because it doesn't want to share it with big tech or with the Fed, for that matter. That's why you are never going to get a digital dollar because Wall Street will not allow it. But the Chinese have it. Now, think of this superhighway as a beautiful big freeway that the Chinese state has created together with Tencent and the semi-private big tech companies and financial companies, but not many people around the world use it. So it's an empty freeway. But with the war in Ukraine, a lot of Russian money is being channeled through there because they've been knocked out of the American payment system. And now you have Saudis, you have Emiratis, you have Indonesian magnates who start feeling queasy. They start feeling that, if the Americans confiscated the Russians' money, maybe they will confiscate mine tomorrow. Maybe they will not like me. So they are hedging their bets and they're using increasingly this superhighway. The Trump administration, not Trump himself, Trump is incapable of having two thoughts and put them together in a logical sequence. But there were people in the Trump administration that understood that this is a clear and present danger to the hegemony of the dollar. And under Biden, the reason why there is this microchip act of banning advanced microchips from going to the Chinese is to stop this superhighway from seriously challenging the monopoly of the dollar. This is my thesis. So it's not just that the United States government is interested in favoring Google versus Baidu. It's not that. It is smart people in Washington, D.C., whose intelligence must not be underestimated, understand that which Paul Volcker, remember, your chairman of the Fed, who before becoming chairman of the Fed, he was an advisor to Henry Kissinger at the National Security Council. From 1970 to 1971, Paul Volcker understood and wrote a memo to Kissinger saying that the only way we can combine our trade deficits with global hegemony is to guarantee that we will have the payment system that allows us to recycle other people's profits. This rise of Chinese cloud capital is a clear and present danger to precisely that idea.
So rather than a competition between firms, you're talking about competition between systems.
Indeed. Look, if you're an American rentier, if your accumulating rents in the United States come from investments that are coming into the real estate sector or into Wall Street, from Germany, from Portugal, from South Korea, from China, your number one worry would be or should be that these investments will stop coming. These investments come only because the American trade deficit creates demand for the German, Korean, Chinese factories. That demand gives profits to the German, Korean, Chinese, Japanese capitalists, and they come and invest in your real estate sector. But that is not going to be the case if a substantial chunk of value added shifts from the dollar system to the Chinese digital currency system.
The voice of Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister in the left-wing Syriza government. We're discussing his book, Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism. The early chapters are a historical argument about how capitalism has changed, given rise in the age of big tech to what he calls techno-feudalism, a system much more akin to the system of forcible rent extraction that existed under feudalism than what we have come to think of as capitalism. The next chapters explore the nature of what he calls cloud capital and the class of people who control it. And he sketches out a theory that you just heard him articulating orally about geopolitics and how rival systems of cloud capital are driving some of the conflicts we see make headlines, like the increasing tension between China and the United States. He then has a couple of appendices where he sketches out and actually diagrams his arguments. One is on the political economy of techno-feudalism, the other, the madness of derivatives. And he is a gifted communicator. It is a book written so that a layperson rather than another economist can understand his arguments. Yanis Varoufakis' book is our featured thank you gift for the 17 minutes remaining in the hour. It is a donation to KPFA of $10 a month or $100 all at once at kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732, or combine it with the 6 documentary series about his life and work called In the Eye of the Storm. You get both together for a donation of $250 all at once. Of course, the most important thing that you get for your donation is not a book or a film series. It is this radio station. It is a broadcaster in your community that brings you conversations like this one. There are not a lot of places in American media, certainly in commercial media, that are going to take a deep dive with an international left-wing economist who's had some experience in government and some reflections on the nature of the world, because you just don't squeeze that in between commercial breaks. That's not the kind of thing that's going to go viral on TikTok. And if you value it, well, we need to see yourself as part of it, because it's the only way KPFA has kept going for the past 75 years. So you can get us 1/10 of the way closer towards making our $1,000 challenge if you donate for the book, or 1/4 of the way if you donate for the book and film series. kpfa.org, 1-800-439-5732. On the fundraising front, thanks to a few donations that have come in so far, we have raised $370 towards our $1,000 challenge. That means $630 to go. 15 minutes to do it, and we have just dropped to 0 callers on the line, which makes me nervous. Nevertheless, we're going to return to the conversation with Yanis Varoufakis and hope that you donate at kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732. Back to the interview. Returning to the comparisons we were making to like late 19th, early 20th century network monopolies, the suite of tools doesn't strike me as very different, right? These emergent monopolies, some got broken up using antitrust law, some got converted to publicly owned entities. You know, the private water companies that used to supply drinking water to my area are now a public entity. And some got very strictly regulated in the public interest as privately held public utilities. What set of tools not already in the state's toolkit need to be applied to the technologies that assail us now?
Well, I wish there were many more examples of your public entity water company. There aren't that many. And the ones we've had left are being privatized left, right, and center, right? So that the staying power of public ownership, especially after Thatcher here in Europe and Reagan in the United States, left much to be desired. There are two of the three that you mentioned moves which are not possible for cloud capital. The first one is breaking them up. You know, when Teddy Roosevelt broke up Standard Oil, it was straightforward. Technically, it was politically, it was very hard, but technically, it was straightforward. There was one company that had a monopoly of petrol stations, gas stations across the United States, and he just broke it up in different regional companies and made them compete with one another. Technically, that was straightforward. There's no way you can do that with Twitter, because the whole point about Twitter is that you can, post an opinion that is read everywhere in the world. So what is the point of breaking up Twitter? How can you break it up? You just can't break it up. A regulation. Well, the algorithm is devilishly complex. If you look at the algorithms that Amazon is using now, with increasing use of artificial intelligence, these algorithms are no longer like they used to be. When I was at university and I was doing computing science, I was studying computing science in my first year as an undergraduate, I could see algorithms that were like menus. Yeah. Step one, you take so much flour, so much sugar, so many eggs. Step two, you mix them together. Step three, you put them in the oven. Step four, step 10, you end up with a cake, right? You could see how it worked. But today, AI is based on programs that are minimal in terms of their substance, sitting on top of huge data sets, using amazing amounts of electricity, and then the people who actually coded those programs have no idea how these programs work. So if OpenAI's engineers, coders, do not know why ChatGPT 4 or 5 or 6 gives you the answer it gives you, they do not know. How can any regulator regulate what these algorithms are doing? How can I gave you an example before of the algorithm that is running Amazon warehouses and which uses more or less the same AI that in other realms is utilized in order to design brilliant antibiotics, in order to weed out workers who show a propensity towards unionizing in some Amazon warehouse. It is fiendishly complicated to work out how the algorithm does that. Even the coder of that algorithm doesn't know how he does it. So how will the Department of Labor, if let's say you have a very progressive administration, wants to help unions and to impede these this demonization of unions and this war against unionization, how do they enter the algorithm to understand the algorithmic class war against unions? You just can't. Only through social ownership of these algorithms can you do that. So we go back to, yes, there is a direct line from the late 19th century socialist movement to what I'm proposing. The socialization of the means, not just of production, distribution, and exchange, as we old Marxists used to say, but also of communication, the algorithms. If we do not socialize and turn into public from private cloud capital, I don't think we'll have a chance as a species.
I like to end on an up note. I think that's a good one. Yanis Varoufakis, thank you so much. Yanis Varoufakis is an economist, prolific author, former finance minister of Greece. His new book is Techno-Feudalism: What Killed Capitalism. And that book is our featured thank you gift for the 9.5 minutes remaining in the hour. It's available in the featured box at kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732. And if you donate for it, you will not just be picking up the book, but making your donation go further towards supporting KPFA so we can bring you conversations like this. Right now, we're facing a $1,000 challenge. I am a bit terrified to report that since the last update, our numbers have not changed. We are still $630 away from making it, although there are 2 people on the phone lines who hopefully are pledging and not complaining. kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732 is the place to join them. The book lays out an argument that we are shifting from a system that, is pretty well understood and theorized as capitalism, a system that sells the product of labor at a profit where power is concentrated in the hands of the people who control that surplus value that's created from that process, capitalists, to one that extracts rent from its ownership of a collection of algorithms and data and computing resources that mediate the real economy where labors and goods and services are exchanged. He goes through how this changes our politics and our society, because this massive algorithmic capital also mediates our conversations with one another, our sociability, our polis. He traces this out to geopolitics. He argues that rival systems of cloud capital are responsible for the rising U.S.-China rivalry in geopolitics. He has solutions for fixing it. He proposes busting open these, what he calls cloud fiefdoms, by requiring interoperability, compensating the labor of us serfs who create value just by, behaving on the internet and creating data for the algorithms to learn from, redistribute that value as basic income. Socializing ownership of the companies that have become fundamental to the operation of our society and economy. Even small detailed things like having the government issue digital IDs so you don't have to rely on Google or Facebook to prove who you are on the internet. He is a gifted communicator. His books, he generally writes for a popular audience, not his academic peers, and this is no exception. It's yours in the featured box for a donation of $10 a month or $100 all at once at kpfa.org or 1-800-439-5732. Oh, as I've been talking, looks like Benita in Burlingame has just donated. Thank you. And Sharon in San Francisco has just donated as well. Thank you, Sharon. And we are now $410 away from making our challenge. I should also mention we have one other thank you gift pertaining to Yanis Varoufakis that I haven't spoken about much. This is a new 6-part documentary series about his life and work. It covers his childhood and political formation as a child of a kind of exiled Marxist revolutionary who becomes an industrialist in Greece. But most of the documentary series dwells on his rise to prominence as finance minister of Greece during its battle with Eurocrats over its sovereign debt crisis in the left-wing Syriza government, when he became probably one of the most prominent voices of the anti-austerity movement in the world. The documentary series is called In the Eye of the Storm. It's yours for a donation of $15 a month or $150 all at once, which we could count towards that challenge if you do it in the next 5 minutes. Here is the trailer for the series.
Debt is to capitalism that which hell is to Christianity. Unpleasant and essential.
We are in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression.
The sacrifices of the Greek people will bring the country back to prosperity.
The 2008 crisis was not one of the normal periodic downturns. It is the longest damage-inducing crisis in the history of capitalism. I could feel that the tsunami was coming, the result being the modern world that we live in. We were negotiating with financial terrorism, creditors who did not want their money back. Every asset of the Greek state was bundled together. This was a hidden bailout, and we were collateral damage.
They want our properties, they want our homeland.
Austerity is another term for class war.
Orchestrated attempt of economic aggression. It cannot be described in any other way.
I could see Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, getting very agitated. He gets the floor. Elections cannot be allowed to change economic policy. It became a massive battle to prevent the public ever from finding out.
I've never listened to such an inaccurate report.
This is what an oligarchy does when an oligarchy gets threatened. Like David and Goliath, they had to get rid of him. The landline rings. If you want your son to continue to return safely every night, you better lay off, and he mentioned a particular bank.
We're being dragged into a labyrinth.
They had to find ways of violating their own rules.
It is Wall Street who is our enemy.
Our regulators became enablers.
All you can talk about is fairy tales of economic growth.
Anybody who does economics as a science is either a fool or is trying to fool you.
We are seeing an almost Newtonian revolution in the science of economics.
It takes a small spark to ignite a revolutionary moment. Either we move beyond capitalism, or we die.
Excerpts from the brand new documentary series, In the Eye of the Storm, chronicling the life and work of Yanis Varoufakis. It is 6 documentaries in total. We are able to give you the credentials to stream them all on the device of your choosing in exchange for a donation of $15 a month or $150 all at once. At kpfa.org, 1-800-439-5732. That is 1-800-HEY-KPFA. Combine it with Yanis Varoufakis' book, Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism. You can get all 6 documentaries, plus the book for a donation of $25 a month or $250 all at once. Whatever you do, we really need you to do something soon. We have exactly 2 minutes and 5 seconds left in the hour. We have $1,000 in challenge money riding on your decision to give. And as of the second, we are $210 away from making it. So if there's anyone out there who's thinking of donating for the documentary series and book together, if you did that pledge, it would be enough to, in one fell swoop, bring in an extra $1,000 for KPFA through this challenge fund. 90 seconds to do it. kpfa.org, 1-800-439-5732. Join Celeste in Rohnert Park, who wrote, "Thank you for keeping us informed," when she pledged. Join Victor in Napa, who wrote, "I love KPFA." Join Sharon in San Francisco, who said, "I love all the programs, and I've been a member for a long time." Thank you, Sharon. Join Benita in Burlingame, Barbara in Sunnyvale, and the folks who've asked to remain anonymous this hour, one of whom signed up as a new monthly KPFA sustainer. 1 minute left, $210 to go. If you're hearing me sound nervous and frantic, it's because I've just seen our call counter drop to 0. That means there is nobody on the phone lines. I don't have a way to tell if someone is in the process of donating through our website at kpfa.org. But if there isn't, we are on the brink of blowing $1,000 challenge. 40 seconds. Look, if you think it's important to have a place like KPFA, if the most important thing that we can give you is the interviews, the breaking news, the local arts and culture, the unformatted music, everything that you get at 94.1 FM, then just make a pledge while we still have time and say the thank you gift is KPFA. There's a caller. KPFA.org, 1-800-439-5732. This is KPFA and KPFB in Berkeley, KFCF 88.1 FM in Fresno, K248BR 97.5 FM in Santa Cruz, or K232FZ 94.3 FM in Montana.